to be co-hosting this event with the Oxford University Media Society. So I'm also joined with George Phillips, who is their president.
Hi.
So the way this event is going to work is that I will introduce our guests, and then George and I are going to start the discussion off by asking a few questions in the first half, and in the second half we will open up the discussion to the audience. So you can submit your questions at any point during the event using the chat box function. I know most people are pretty much versed in Zoom culture at this point, but if you do submit a question, everyone will be able to see it. So yeah, just for a bit of background, just for a bit of background on these masterclasses, we did our first one at the end of Hillary, and we've since moved over to Zoom since lockdowns began. And we've hosted journalists from Mark Dowser to Will Hutton and John Simpson, just to name a few. And we will be hosting more throughout Trinity, so do keep an eye on our Facebook page and our website for more information. The Blue was launched in January, and we have seen a rapid growth in our readership in our short history. And we are the first new student newspaper in Oxford in over 30 years. And we take a lot of pride in our commitment to helping to develop journalistic skills in our wonderful team of talented and very promising writers. The paper was founded on an ethos of helping to improve access to a professional sphere, which can often feel very almost impenetrable and dominated by a certain demographic. And that's where these masterclasses come in. We hope that they will provide inspiration and practical advice for aspiring writers, and also just be a great way to learn from journalists who we admire and read often. So, George.
Thanks very much for that, Bria. So you can just listen to me natter for 60 seconds or so, and then we'll crack on with Tim. I wanted to say a huge thank you to Phoebe, Lois, and everyone else at the Blue for inviting me along to this. I'm really excited. We haven't collaborated before, but really appreciate the chance to interview my favourite columnist of all time. Looking forward to it. So I'm, and he didn't pay me to say that as well. That was all from me.
I will now.
So I'm George. I'm president of the Oxford Media Society. I'm hoping that some of you will have been to our events over the last year, but essentially we're one of the largest student-run media societies in Europe. And we try to link the university with the media industry, and we do this by hosting journalists, broadcasters, CEOs, and senior staff from companies like Bloomberg, Netflix, Spotify. Basically anyone big in the industry, we try to get them in to give a talk, to give workshops, that sort of thing. So, and by hosting these events, we try to provide a forum for discussion and a place for students and academics to interact with people who are working in the media. So, as you can imagine, this term things are looking a bit different for us. In light of coronavirus, we're launching a podcast series, which I am super excited about, and the team at the Media Society have been working really hard to get that off the ground. The first episode is going to be coming out this weekend, during which I'm going to be talking to BBC journalist Rita Chakrabarti about her career, about diversity at the BBC, and about how news organisations are adapting to handle the pandemic. So I'd love if you could all have a listen when that comes out. And I think that's enough from me. It's enough about MediaSoc. If you want to find out more, you can take a look at social media and all the information's there. But back to you now, I think, Bria.
Right, so on to Tim, who we're all here for. Tim Dowling is our guest today, and he is one of the most loved and best known columnists in the UK. He is celebrated for his writing on life in London, which he executes deftly and with a razor-sharp sense of wit and candour, week in, week out. Having moved to the UK from at the age of 27, his career has seen him navigate the worlds of data entry, fiction and non-fiction writing, and journalism. He's penned a biography on the inventor of the disposable razor, as well as a novel on the life of a freelance journalist whose midlife crisis takes a dark turn when he finds an internet thread dedicated to criticizing his life's work. Two of his most recent publications, How to Be a Husband and Dad, You Suck, were called affectionately by The Spectator self-hinder books as opposed to self-help books, and they speak with warmth and wisdom on what it really means to be a parent and a partner. So before we get into the deep journo stuff, Tim, how are you doing? How are you keeping up? How's the tortoise doing in these strange times?
He's all right. I mean, I can almost see him from here. It's great to be here. This is far and away the most technically complicated thing I've ever been involved in. Oddly, my life hasn't changed that much. It's always slightly embarrassing to say that lockdown is treating me pretty well. But it's quite odd being surrounded by people who are new to this. Obviously my neighbors, and I feel a bit overlooked suddenly because I work at the end of my garden. But otherwise, yeah, I'm good, thanks.
That's good to hear. So Tim, I think if we look at that bio just then, it's pretty clear that you've had quite a varied career. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, there's some embarrassing things, before that I don't include on my CV, parking cars and things like that. But it was accurate.
That's good. And I think a lot of people are going to be here because they want to find out more about making a living as a writer and what life is like, essentially. So could you perhaps talk us through your writing career trajectory a little bit and maybe shed some light on what the path to becoming a columnist has looked like for you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the young people of today are always shocked when we talk about, the fact that it used to be pretty easy to get a job in journalism, certainly compared to now. So a lot of what I say will have no bearing on either the present or the future. But first of all, I'm not trained in journalism in any way. I did an English degree at a small Vermont liberal arts college, which is, one of those things that prepares you for a lifetime of waiting tables, essentially. And I did a bit of that. And when I came to the UK, I sort of gave up everything that I had in New York and came here with not many skills. I was working in a magazine in New York, but I was working in the design department as a real beginner. I was learning to do layout and design at a time when cutting and pasting was something you did with glue and scissors. And they sort of got rid of that by the time I came to the UK. And it was all just starting to be a digital thing. So for a long time, I didn't do much of anything. And I had a data entry job, which I suppose was in a vague way training for writing, at least in the sense that I was summarizing the plots of 10,000 films that I hadn't seen. So I was writing a lot every day, but it was nothing I ever thought anyone would ever read. I suppose it's because you're essentially following a template, you're always struggling to find different ways of writing the same thing over and over again, which is a lot of what journalism ends up being. But that was I pretty much hit a dead end. And around that time, 1997, something like that, I got a call from GQ magazine from someone who's a friend of a friend, who said that they had a section at the back called Man Enough every month, and did I want to write one? And I didn't know why this person was calling me, and I always imagined, I guess, that one day this phone call, would happen. But I thought I would have to pick up the phone first, at least. I couldn't imagine that my reputation for data entry had preceded me. So she said, it's a different subject every month, and we pick up a different person, and I can send you a couple of copies of the magazine if you like. And she said, this month we want to do one called Man Enough to Live Off Your Girlfriend. And I suddenly realized what had happened is that they had gone through and they picked these topics. They'd pick 10 or 12 for the year. And then they'd go off in search of people who fit the bill. And someone who knew me said, yeah, I know a guy like that. And that's why they called me. But I just said yes, and I did it. And actually they liked it. I remember it had they even gave it a cover line. On the cover of the magazine, it said, Rent Boy, How to Live Off Your Girlfriend. You sound like a pimp, but But I started working for them sort of on and off from then on. I think I did the next month as well, and I had to do the next month under a pseudonym. And at that point, I sort of thought I'd arrived. They gave me pretty steady work. I went into the magazine at least once a month for meetings and stuff. And because I had no experience, one of the main things I was doing at that point was just pretending that I was used to all this. You know, that none of this was coming as a huge shock to me. I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't really know how, you know, at the beginning, when if people asked me to do an interview, I would just look at a bunch of interviews and try to copy that. You know, anything, all I was trying to do was make it seem like I knew what I was doing. I thought, if you do the first one and if they take it, then after that, it will get easier. And that was fine for about 2 years, although you couldn't, even I couldn't make money. They gave me a column at one point, but a column they paid 300 quid, I think, for it. And you can't live off, even then you couldn't live off 300 quid a month. And I didn't have any other work. So I slowly had to kind of branch out and write for other magazines. The editor of GQ once called me up once and he said, this women's magazine has asked me to write an article. And I told him I didn't want to do it. And I said, you would do it. So here's their number. But before I said I didn't want to do it, I screwed them up to 750 quid. So don't take anything less. And I rang them up and I did it for 400 quid. Because I was too scared to insist. And then I got sacked, you know, they changed editors and I got sacked off GQ. They got rid of my column. And that was it. The phone didn't ring, and I thought, this is all over. I'm going to have to go back to data entry. And it probably took it. Then that's when my apprenticeship started, I suppose, when I had to start to really ring people and find ways to get work out of thin air, you know. And it was very difficult, and I hated it. And it was eventually a lot of the people who left GQ started working at newspapers, and I started writing bits and pieces for the Independent and the Telegraph, and then later on, probably 1999, 2001, around there, I started writing for the Guardian, and that's pretty much what happened. I mean, since then, I'm still freelance. I have a contract with the Guardian. I write for other people when I can. I write books when I've got time, but that's it. So at no point did I go back and get any training.
Did you pitch cold to the Guardian then?
No, they rang me about something, and it was around Christmas time, and I'm used to the notion now that everybody gets a little bit short-handed at Christmas and in August, because a lot of regular people are on holiday. And they just somebody had this idea, and I don't know, I'm not sure why they called me, but I did it, and then I didn't hear that from them again for a year. And I thought, I really screwed that up. That was a real opportunity, and I screwed it up. And then a year later, Emily Wilson, who worked at G2, who is now the editor of New Scientist, rang me up out of the blue as if there hadn't been this giant year gap, and asked me to write something else. And I thought, and then they were looking for ideas. They were revamping. They happened to be revamping the magazine. I was more in touch with the people who worked there. I'd had lunch with them, and I'd seen them in the office. I'd gone to the office to do some assignments and things. And I pitched them a couple of sort of steady things to kind of get my foot in the door. Just little columns for G2 that came back every week, and with enough legs that I could spin them out for 2 years until they ran out of steam. And then you'd have to go on to the next one.
So do you think there's like a sort of a sense of patience, but also luck involved, would you say, in your career?
Definitely luck. Patience, I guess patience, probably more patience with myself than anything else, in that I'm sort of, contrary to what a lot of people think, this is not that bad a job for a coward. Every once in a while, I tend to drop the ball. I fail to seize opportunities. And it still sort of comes round. I think if you're diligent about the work itself, people will ring you up again, because it comes as a huge surprise to me that you find out that a lot of people who are quite well-known, quite successful freelance writers are really difficult to work with. And you think, how do you get away with that? I don't, think that every time they write an article, there's some trouble about the word length or the way it was edited. And you just think, you write it, and then they give you the money, and then that's it. Your relationship with them has ended as far as regards that project. Stop going on about how they edited it. Who cares? That's their job. They do the headline. They do, if they want to do a misleading headline, that's their prerogative.
It's very stoical.
Sorry?
No, I just said it's very stoical approach, just like
Okay.
in and out.
Not everyone has that, but I mean, it's not It's not like I don't care. I'm just frightened. I'm a frightened little man. You know, I shout and scream at the walls in my office about these things, but I don't ever ring them up and give them a hard time. I shouldn't even say that now because they could hear this.
Well, so I was mentioning earlier that we had our first master class, one of these master classes in Hillary, and it was with Alan Rusbridger. And in that we came onto the topic of columns, and you invariably came up. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he said that you write brilliantly on what is essentially nothing. And I think from my background reading, you know, quite a few people have said that, you know, very admirably, you know, with a lot of admiration.
It's amazing because it means nothing.
So how would you describe your approach to writing about topics which a lot of people would find difficult to penetrate creatively, or just and find difficult to approach?
I guess I mean, a lot of that is specifically to do with the column I write for Weekend, which is really about, because it's about my life. It does tend to be about nothing or about very little. I think one of the things that you're looking for, if you're writing about, as long as you're writing about life itself and people find that they have something in common with it, as long as you're honest enough and take enough care when you're describing what these things are like, the other people will see something of themselves in it, and then you're on pretty safe ground because they won't be bored by it. They think it's interesting. But I think it's also, I quite like the exercise of, you know, I always think people who do cookery columns, when they get to the point where they have to write the recipe, you just think, oh, how do you write a recipe? It's so boring. They're so procedural. And one of the things you do is you keep them as short as possible. So when you're going through the minutiae of something and you're trying to be, one of the things is to be painfully accurate, and the other is to sort of find new, short, brief, pithy ways to describe these things so that people don't get bored with them. I kind of like the challenge of having to write about something boring. If you interview a scientist and he gives you a really boring sort of technical rundown of his particular branch of genetics, is to try and be accurate, you know, just the paragraph where I have to be as accurate as possible about what he means, not dumbing it down, but also keep it short and approachable. I sort of enjoy, it's like doing a crossword puzzle a little bit, you know, it's fun. Otherwise, I think that the good thing about writing about nothing is that it's you can do it week in, week out, because it's not remotely dependent on anything interesting happening to you. You know, my big worry was always at the beginning was, I don't think enough stuff happens to me, because it's one of the great lies that writers indulge in, is they write about interesting things, but they themselves sit in a sort of tiny boxy little room all day in front of a screen. They never go anywhere. I mean, they get up in the morning and very often still in their pajamas, go down to a computer and write all day. And they, you know, sometimes I get sent to the shops for things, but that's it.
Although probably less so at the moment.
I'm required to put myself in harm's way at least 3 times a week, just so it's fair. You know, why should everybody else in the house take all the risk?
I think it might be quite interesting to pick up on something you said just then. You were talking about kind of writing and being honest when you're writing, and kind of embracing it. And I know that something I love about the column, something my mum loves, pretty much everyone loves, is that we get this kind of fantastic window into your life, and it's kind of so relatable a lot of the time. But I was just wondering, do you ever find it difficult to kind of balance the fact that you're writing about family life and quite personal topics, and then it's kind of being read by tens, hundreds of thousands of people?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I mean, I think I'm pretty confident that I know where the line is, but that's probably because I've stepped over it a bunch of times, and it has been brought to my attention by my wife and children on several occasions. I mean, when they were small, I had an arrangement with my children where if I quoted them directly, I would pay them £5. But they had to come to me with it, and because they never read anything I wrote, they never saw it. Generally, they never saw it, so I didn't have to shell out that often. And obviously, you can get in trouble when they're small. I didn't think about it that much. But as they got older, they sort of take more of a share of ownership of their lives, and their privacy gets bigger almost. So you have to find your way around that. In my experience, it's usually nothing that £5 won't fix. Sometimes 10. I think once 15, but otherwise. But there are weird things. You don't know. The thing about me is I know. If I may sound too honest sometimes to people, but it's not too honest for me, and it's nothing. I'm very good at keeping my own secrets. There's nothing that I don't want you to know about me accidentally slips in there. I'm using it to try and trick people into liking me, basically. But I don't always know where that is with other people.
Sure.
I know my wife pretty well, but every once in a while I make a mistake, and I think she didn't want anyone to know that. And I get more worried about my neighbors because they didn't ask to live next door to me. And you don't want to fall out with your neighbors. Sometimes you fall out with them badly, you can't even sell your house.
So is it a case of kind of picking and choosing, or and feel free to dodge this, is there kind of an element of artistic license involved?
I think one of the things about it is that in this sort of writing generally, I would be happy to take a lot of artistic license. It's essentially written in the way that novels are written. It's dialogue. It's obviously a lot of the dialogue is the way I remember it, rather than something I recorded, and a lot of the people who were involved in the conversation might remember it differently, and they might come up to me later and say, "This is not what I said." But I think if it's in a newspaper, people expect it to be accurate, so I try not to mess with the words too much. The words I try to get first of all the words that people said to me right, insofar as I can remember them, and then I try to stick with events that are true. That occasionally you want to compress time a little bit for the sake of squeezing 2 days of stuff into 600 words. You have to leave out chunks of the day, and it might appear that two things happened right next to each other. I simply have not included the paragraph where a bunch of other stuff happened. I think that's sort of that kind of leeway I allow myself, a little bit of collapsing of time, so that sometimes you have a conversation and you don't finish it till the next day, and you think, well, I mean, that would be accurate, but the reading public won't stand for that.
Sure.
But I think it's sorry. Actually,
carry on.
I was just going to say, I think it is quite tricky. There's definitely a school of column writing, which is about peeling the skin off yourself week in, week out, which a lot of tabloids are known for, and I don't do that, and I don't want to do that. I don't think you should have to compromise your own sense of self in order to write about stuff that happens to you. There's got to be a way around. I'm a big fan of the notion that there's a writing solution to these kind of problems. There's a way of writing around it. You can say something, you just haven't found that. You've just got to find the right words. That's probably not true, but it's one of those things that I believe. I have faith in.
I'm sure someone will write that down as a quote. That's fantastic.
No, I won't stand by it.
I was going to say, you also, for Gun, you write television reviews.
Yeah.
So do you, obviously it's a completely different form of writing in many senses, but do you feel as though you have a particularly different approach to that writing? Do you go into sort of different headspace, because it is an opinion piece in the end? It's your opinion
it is an opinion piece, and I'm not a great opinion haver. I don't. I'm not that happy in where I have to stick my neck out about things. But I think that the thing about TV writing, and I'm like the third string TV reviewer. There's Lucy Mangan's the TV reviewer, and she's brilliant, and I'm very much in her kind of shadow. But the first thing you do is I try to watch the TV program the way I would if it was just on TV, which is not what I'm doing. I'm sitting at my same computer, watching it from a website, which I have a password that allows me to watch it a week ahead of time. So the review will be done the day it airs. And I'm watching, sometimes it's the screen, sometimes the recording isn't that great. Sometimes they haven't quite finished editing it, or the narration hasn't been done by the person who's going to narrate it. It's just some producer who's reading out the words off the script. So but I tried to come at it in the first place as just a guy who watches TV, because that's what everybody else who's reading the TV review has come at it as. And then I go through it and sort of try and tease out what it's about. But it's more, it's like any kind of review. It's like a book review or anything else like that. I guess to me, it's not so much an opinion. You have to come down on one side or the other. But I don't like giving things kind of 1 star and slagging it off very much. Sometimes something's bad enough, I don't mind. But for the most part, I also hate the stars. I think between 3 and 4 stars, 3 stars feels like you're sort of, you're giving it's like the kiss of death, 3 stars. And 4 stars is like maybe too much. You think they don't do half stars. I hate this. Can we, but you have to. That's the other thing they call me about, how many stars? So I can't remember how your question started.
Sorry, it was a pretty vague question. But I think
that's quite a woolly answer to how to do a TV review. And it was something, I had the opportunity to do it once, and the first time I did it, I'm sure I just read the TV review from the day before and said, just copy this. If they accept it, then you can branch out. I mean, I think one of the things, obviously you don't want to conform. Everyone wants to have a voice, but I think when you're starting out, it's really good to copy, to kind of try and write the most conformist version of that thing, just so you have in your head this kind of template to escape from or expand upon, just so you know what you're kicking against at least. Learn how to do it the regular way first.
That's really good advice. I think I had one more question I wanted to chuck your way, and then we might open up to the audience after that, but I'll let Bria direct that. But I was just wondering, Tim, we're all stuck at home at the moment. A lot of us stuck at home with our families when we should be at uni with our friends. And I think I'm probably not alone in saying that we're going slightly mad. Do you think your column has been received differently over the last few weeks? Do you feel like people are kind of relating more to the kind of family friction almost? What's it been like?
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, it's not often that I can feel like I can even tell that sort of thing. You get comments, but and you can sort of there's an app now where you can sort of judge whether the readership has gone up or down. But I think there's this kind of, just because everybody is suddenly having to do what I've always done, I feel like it obviously it's sort of going mad in your own house with your own family and feeling a bit desperate, which I've been writing about for 12 years, is suddenly really relevant to everybody. It's like, now it's like an advice column almost, whereas before it was just like sharing in the sad despair of somebody you didn't know. So I think it has, and I don't know how much longer it can kind of go on in that vein, because I mean, we'll see actually, because everyone's going through cycles of craziness. I was fine until the rains came, and then you really can't go outside, and you think, this is it, I'm gonna crack up. So I think in a weird way, everybody we lived in a very atomized world until quite recently, and now everybody's on the same page again. and we're all. It's funny when you write about cutting your own hair, or running out of wine on a Wednesday and not being able to get any. Everybody's like, "Yeah, that just happened to me." So it is odd. You see things. I mean, I wrote something last week about having these really vivid dreams about my old bosses. And I woke up the next day after I'd written it, but before it came out, and everybody on Twitter was talking about how much more vivid their dreams were. And I wasn't trying to tap into anything. It is what's happening to everybody. And I felt like, oh, see, now this will be over by the time Saturday rolls around. Everybody will be sick of talking about this. But they're not, because nothing's changed. It's just, there's so little stimulus. That I think it is quite weird. It's quite privileged. It took me 12 years to get here. To be on, everyone's caught up, or they've slowed down to the extent.
But now at least you can feel nice and smug knowing that you started 12 years earlier.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for the questions you were submitting on the chat. They're brilliant. It would be lovely for you guys to ask some of them yourselves if you'd like to, and you can just unmute yourself temporarily to do that. So just going on from what Tim was just speaking about, if Grace Spencer, you'd like to ask your question.
Hi, I was just wondering, sort of expanding on what you said about your relationships with editors. I wondered whether you'd ever felt like you had a sort of dispute in the editing process between professionalism and wanting to get paid for your work, but also maintaining a sense of creative control over it.
Yes, I have. More in the past than before. I mean, most of the stuff I write now tends to be like the column tends to be either very lightly edited or not edited, or if they really want to change something, they'll give me a call, and that feels like a very privileged position. But certain back in the early days when I was writing for basically any newspaper, and at some point probably every newspaper, to try and just make enough money. There were certain newspapers that really have a house style and a very heavy hand, and I tend not to worry about this sort of thing unless you're trying to be funny, and they sort of ruin that, and then I get furious, because obviously jokes jokes are hard, and they depend on very minute things being the right, they depend on a certain precision, words being the right order, something like timing. You can't quite call it timing, but you sometimes you just put in a couple of extra words in there because you want the reader to wait for the funny bit, for impact, and they'll come and swap things around, and it just drives you insane. Or they'll take the best joke in the whole thing, which is 3/4 of the way down, and they'll use it as the headline, and you just think, oh. Yeah, so I do get furious. I tend to think that after the fact is too late. You think maybe you should go and shout at someone for next time, so that next time they don't know. But I don't tend to get angry after it's happened. It's too late. And I think there's something you can learn from the way people edit your pieces. Most of the time, when I see something in print and it's different to what I've written, I look at it to see what I could have done to make, what maybe I should have made those changes. Maybe I should have seen that. You don't get a lot of feedback. So comparing your version to their version is often pretty instructive. You learn a lot.
I think it might be interesting, perhaps. Sorry, did we hear from Grace just then?
Yes.
Great. Perhaps, if you're talking about the editing process, we've had a couple of fantastic questions from Maddie Ross. Maddie, do you want to put your question to Tim? If she's still here.
How do you square being honest and open in your articles and trying to write really kind of truthfully about your life if you then kind of give up creative control over them once you've been paid? I just wanted to know how you square that, especially because you're writing about your family, and you wouldn't want an untrue portrayal of them, and they probably wouldn't want an untrue portrayal of them that might not be solved £5 sort of thing.
I didn't mean to maybe sound quite so mercenary. The truth of the fact is that I get paid a retainer, so I'm not selling my soul each and every week. I think when I write about my family, I am much more careful, and I would definitely. Sometimes I've had a last minute change of heart about the way I've worded something, and I go in and say, look, you can't print it this way. Just change the sentence. Otherwise, I'm going to be A, in huge trouble, and B, it's not going to come across the way I want it to come across. I tend to be very, very careful in the initial stages. Once or twice, I've shown my wife something before it's gone to the paper. Usually it was because it was something to do with school. I mean, we didn't want to get in trouble at school. One of my children, last day of school, got kicked out of school on his last day of classes because he and his friends had dressed as Pac-Man and the ghosts that chase Pac-Man. And then he chases the ghost. And they'd run through all the classrooms with the music played on a boombox above their heads, you know, in a zigzag pattern like Pac-Man does, through all the desks and things, throwing sweets at all the younger kids. And they basically got expelled for that. And my wife, the teacher, form teacher, called up and told my wife, and she listened to the whole, she said, yes, I understand very, very carefully. And she said, well, he's been kicked out of school for the Pac-Man thing. And I said, did you tell the teacher that you knew he was going to do it? And she said, I told him I knew about it, but I didn't tell him I paid for the fucking costumes. Which I thought was hilarious. But then when I showed my wife, she said, you can't put that in. You know, he's got to graduate. So, you know, stuff to do with school, stuff to do with work sometimes, stuff to do with my wife's work, that stuff I'm really careful about, and that has to come out. Nobody ever asks me, could you make this more personal? You know, I've never had an editor lean, can you expose more of your private life? I think if you worked at the day, that might happen. I think it does happen. And then I would definitely have something to say about that.
Dylan Lee, would you like to ask your question?
Can't talk right now.
There we go. Okay, well, I can be the voice of Dylan and step in for him then. So Dylan is asking, do you feel like being in your position affects how your acquaintances act around you? And have you noticed people being particularly extravagant, he's given a little question mark there, around you?
We want you to Australian accent as well.
Yeah, in the hopes of being written about. And if so, do you take the bait?
It's one of those things that I've noticed more recently, considering how long I've done this for. You would have thought that this would have been something that happened early on, but yes, I've noticed that people have a lot to say afterwards if I include them, and I tend to try and not take the bait because that would be something very inauthentic would quite quickly emerge from that sort of marketplace, I think. And then you never really know ahead of time who's going to. I mean, someone came up to me when we were on holiday and said, "How come you never put me in your column?" And I said, "Because you once told me you never ever wanted to be in my column, so I haven't." He said, "I didn't say that." I said, "Yes, you did." So I put him in my column that week, and then I don't know. I think he was still vaguely pissed off. I mean, most people don't like being summed up, I find, you know, and there's something you write about something people in an offhand way, and they don't, and they're just sort of minor characters in this drama. They don't like it, but a lot of times people just like being mentioned. I've started to be a bit freer. using people's real first names, because I think people do sort of like it, but I'm pretty careful about it because you never know. And sometimes people will ask you, when are you going to put me in your column? And then you do, and then they don't like it. And it's too late then. So I used to never use people's names or make up a pseudonym. And then a couple of people, I just used them because I thought their names sounded so improbable that, and then sometimes people's names are so middle class, you just think, I don't want people to know that I know this many people called Piers, you know. And that's why I don't use my children's names, because it's just, and that's why I never say what kind of car I own. It's just, you never want to give people extra reasons to hate you when you're trying to make them laugh. It doesn't work.
Matthew Webb, did you want to ask your question? If not, George can always do it in an accent.
Didn't do that.
Yeah, sorry, my camera's not working. But it just seems as if you like being a freelance journalist. But I was wondering if that came with any cons.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
No, you go. That was it.
It does come with cons. To be perfectly honest, I've never really known anything else. I think once, a very long time ago, I got offered to cover someone's maternity leave at the Observer, and the money was just awful. And then I got really paranoid. I thought, do they think that that's how little I make as a freelancer? And then I thought I better never let them find out how much I make as a freelancer, because. So I mean, if you're busy, the money can be pretty good, or at least it used to be back in those days. I mean, the truth is, it hasn't got worse, but it hasn't really changed. You know, the kind of piece that I would get 300 quid for in 1996, I would probably still get 300 quid for now. And you know, so there's been no rise in sequence with the cost of living. The downsides are that I don't have any kind of office life, which might not sound like a downside, but I do tend to feel slightly out of the loop. And occasionally I'll go to lunch with a Guardian colleague and try and pick up as much sort of gossip as I can, just to know where everyone is. And I think that there are other freelance writers who are better at that sort of thing than I am. And they're much more in the loop. And they probably get more work than I do. I mean, they're probably, you know, and I think that's part of my nature. I think it suits me to be freelance because I'm a bit of a loner, but it's not good for me, if you know what I mean. You know, it would be better if I hung out with people more.
Do you think it's feasible for people looking to, write, to go into journalism, for them to start off as a freelancer, or are those days pretty much gone? Should people be looking to grad schemes and the like, and then moving to freelance later once they've established their name?
I think it sort of depends on how much you really want, how much you like writing. I mean, depending on whether you find it lonely or boring or difficult. I mean, I feel like I used to know a lot of people who in my day were looking for a way out of writing. You know, they were looking for a way out of freelance writing into a job where they could sit at a desk and tell other people what to write, because they wanted to edit and they wanted to commission things and they wanted to work at a newspaper or work at a magazine. And they found like freelance writing as a sort of way in to sort of wangle a job where you got like benefits and holiday pay and stuff, and they just didn't like writing enough. I quite like writing, and I think sometimes if you take a regular job or get onto a scheme, as you say, you work your way into a magazine from the staff up, you end up doing a lot of stuff that isn't writing. And I see the opposite drift now with people taking redundancy money from newspapers and things, as people are embarking on freelance writing careers, having worked in offices. So I'm sort of the wrong person to ask what the general drift is and what the future will hold. But I mean, keep your ear to the ground. One thing is always going to be more. There's going to be more work in one area than the other. And I think the thing is the writing, the need for the writing doesn't go away. If you're a staff writer and you leave to become a freelance writer, they'll use you because they need somebody to write stuff, and they've always used you because you're good at it, and they'll keep you. But I don't. It's, as I say, it's not for everybody. I spend a lot of time by myself, and I spend a lot of time fretting about whether I've got enough work lined up, and whether I've done enough in a day. I'm not great at self-discipline, even after all these years. If this is like, being a freelance writer is like doing your homework on the bus on the way to school every day for the rest of your life. And if someone had told me that, I would have never taken it up. But it turns out that's one of my few talents, is I'm good at doing my homework really quickly, right before it's time to hand it in.
You've just said as well that the need for writing won't go away, which I think is interesting, and obviously it's proven to be true thus far, at least. We had a question from Maddie, another one in the chat, and she was basically wondering whether, now that we're all kind of living in this strange, lockdown era, do you think that other people are going to start kind of mimicking your style? Are they going to be picking up on the same themes? And how do you kind of stay relevant, I suppose?
Well, that's a question that, keeps me up late at night.
Sorry, that was really badly phrased as well. That wasn't meant to
my wife
sound...
would say, what are you worried about? You've been irrelevant for the last at least 5 years.
There you go. Maddie's apologising to you in the chat as well.
I think relevance is, I think there is, obviously that day will come for me. But there has always been this kind of personal writing. There's always been this kind of diary thing. And this was something that I think that everybody was initially worried about when what we used to call Internet 2.0 came along. And people were required to basically fill in the internet themselves. There was no more professional writing, and people started writing blogs, and people who wrote blogs started getting work at mainstream publications, and everyone thought, this is it, they're all coming for us. The general public is going to come and take our phony baloney jobs. And they sort of didn't, and I think part of that is because good writing is hard. And it's not something that everyone can do. And it's not something that everybody has the sort of, I guess, finickiness to do. I mean, it's a bit, there's a lot of detail work in it. And it can be a little bit boring. It's fun to be in print, but it can be quite boring to get there. So I'm not that worried about, again, the fact that lockdown is going to turn everyone into a columnist, because I don't think it will. And at the moment, as I said before, I'm sort of surfing a wave where suddenly people are interested in really boring stuff. So it's good for me. But I think I couldn't predict what's going to emerge, but I think things will be very different at the end of this. I don't think anybody knows how, so I think we should all pay attention, because a new dispensation is coming. We've got to be ready.
And you'll be spoiled for choice with material as well. Look on the bright side.
Absolutely.
I think we've got time for another question. Andreas Janssen, would you like to answer your question?
Yes, no problem.
There we go.
I just butchered your name as well.
Which is completely fine. I was just wondering, because you said, I try to write, when doing TV reviews and film reviews and such.
Yeah.
I try to write as just a normal guy sat at home watching films. So not as a critic, in other words, but how do you achieve that tone? Given that, you need to have some authority to give it 5 stars or 4 stars or whatever.
Yeah, summoning up the authority to do that is quite an issue for me. I don't necessarily, I didn't mean to make it sound like I tried to write it like I was just a sort of guy watching TV. I try to watch it that way, at least in the first instance, so that I have that sort of instinctive impression of what it was like that an ordinary viewer would have. And then on top of that, I go and watch it again, at least one more time, sometimes 3 times, partly because you have to do that to get everyone's names and stuff. You know, you have to write down the spelling of everyone's names, and the spellings of towns and things, all things that crop up. You think, you know, if they mention a sort of obscure village in New Zealand, you have to think, oh, and they don't spell it out. They just say it. So you have to go and try and figure out how it's spelled. That sort of numbing detail has to be done at the end. And that can be sort of, that kind of thing can slightly wreck your first impressions of a TV program. You know, you may end up losing your enthusiasm for it as you watch the same bit over and over again, trying to see how something is pronounced. So I like to have a fresh viewing at the beginning, where I sit down and watch it as if I were just watching TV, where I don't write too much down, maybe just make a few notes of things I think of to say about it. And then later have a viewing where I try to analyze it. And what's good about that is I think the first time you get a very general impression. The second time you watch it, quite specific things, whether that's parallels to other programs or little inconsistencies that annoy you or small details that make it special, that's when they will crop up. There's stuff you wouldn't necessarily notice the first time. So there's a little bit of falsehood in the sense that you're trying to achieve a seamless review that just seems like a combination of regular guy with a tremendous amount of authority. And that really is a synthesis of 2 separate viewings, one of which is for general impressions, and tends to be where you decide whether something is good or bad, as it were. Does this stink or is it good?
No, yeah, it does.
The second one, you're coming up with reasons for that impression, I suppose. You're coming up with rationales for why you felt that way. And the only problem comes then when the second time you watch it, you change your mind. You know, you hate it the second time, whereas you loved it the first time. It's always difficult. But that's how I do it anyway. Someone else.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a miracle.
Just realised I was muted there. Something someone submitted, Tim, which I think can be answered in a sentence, but I'm very curious to hear the answer. Rosa asks, how's the band?
The band is obviously in lockdown across London and the Southwest at the moment. We were recording putting the finishing touches on a CD, and we're destined to play 2 kind of comeback festivals. We had quite a good slot at one of them. Obviously, both those festivals have been postponed a year. So our year off has turned into 2 years off, it looks like. But actually, we've been invited back to both those festivals in 2021. And we're hoping that somewhere on the end of June, we'll be able to sort of slip into the studio with masks on and just do the last bits. But we have done one of the festivals, the Ramblin' Roots Festival, it's a very good festival, cancelled. We did one of those lockdown songs for that. Everybody, me in my shed, everyone else in their little rooms and sheds, trying, the other most difficult thing I've ever done technically, trying to all play the same song at the same time. And you can see that on, I don't know where it is. I think you can find it on Twitter or Facebook. It's a technical masterpiece.
Brilliant. We will definitely link that then.
If you can find it. The song is called Westward Ho. But I don't know whether it's up on our YouTube channel or whether it's just been slapped onto Facebook.
Don't worry, I'm sure we can dig it out. Lois and Phoebe, it's hit 6 o'clock, and I don't think we've had any more questions, so I'm not sure if you guys want to bring this to a close.
I just, if there's anything else, Tim wanted to bring up, but, you've been doing an excellent job so far, so I don't want to get involved.
No, I mean, I would just say, don't, if you want to have a career in journalism or writing, don't be put off by anything I've said. Obviously, it's hard, and it's harder than it ever was, but I think, as I said, that they always will still need the writing. And if they like you and they like your work, you can find a way, I think.
That's a nice positive note to end on, I think.
I wish I put it better, but it's still
I think that's beautifully phrased. Bria, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was just going to say that would have been a lovely way to end, but we've also just had another question, which I think is quite a nice one. Madeline, whose mic's not working, but she's just said that you mentioned that a lot of your work is done at the last minute, which suggests you're not too crippled by perfectionism. Do you have any tips for writers who still have that problem?
I am quite crippled by perfectionism, which is why I do everything at the last minute. I mean, it's actually a strategy more than anything else. Is if you've got lots of time, for me, I get so worried about these things that I tend not to do anything with that time. I tend to sort of, I'll start something and then be unable to get any further. And I think the one thing that stops me being too precious about anything is having 2 hours to get it in. So in a sense, I mean, it's a bit, very often I will have thought about what I'm going to write for a long time ahead of time. And I will have made notes, maybe, not for the column. I don't tend to make notes about my own life. That would be weird. But the actual writing I tend to do in one burst, quite close to the actual deadline. And that's what motivates me, is suddenly the feeling that it doesn't have to be good anymore. It just has to be done by 5. And that, at the beginning, that was the only way I could do it. I didn't have enough confidence in it being good, and I wanted it to be better than it was. And I had to sort of, I suppose, one way to force yourself, you think at the time, well, I'm basically forcing myself to be mediocre in order to get it done. But everyone has to do that. I mean, is it Madeline who asked the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, Madeline, it's that perfectionism is something that is a sort of symptom of being afraid of it not being as good as you think it ought to be, and sometimes you have to sort of just be so late with it that you rid yourself of that need for perfectionism because you're just in a giant hurry. And it usually works out, and eventually you will get over it, and you can spend more time doing it. But I think very often the first thing you write is always the best thing anyway, and you spend a lot of time second guessing yourself, and that perfectionism is just a lot of second guessing. Don't leave yourself the time, I say.
And that's good advice, not just for journalism, but for everyone writing university essays this term as well.
Yeah, okay. Don't tell anyone.
Last thing I will say, we've had a couple of people requesting a banjo ditty to cheer them up. Don't worry if that's not going to happen, but I thought if you don't ask, you don't get. That's fine if not.
I will demonstrate, because anything else would be too complicated. I will demonstrate what we call claw hammer or frailing banjo, which is the kind of banjo I play when I'm drunk.
Excellent.
The other kind is too complicated, then you'll screw it up.
Do you want to do it now, or do you want Lois to do her final bit, and then you can see people out as they leave the call?
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, and I can give you a chance to really have second thoughts about this.
Exactly.
Sure. I mean, I've been laughing my way all the way through this. It's been absolutely brilliant to have you on. Just wanted to thank you so much for coming, and also to thank our wonderful hosts and Oxford Media Society, George and Briha. You've been brilliant. One small thing to plug on my end: we've got Camilla Long coming on next week to do one of these. So do tune in next week. And other than that, I'll leave it off to you three to play us out, I guess.
Okay, I'm gonna make this up.
Brilliant. That was absolutely wonderful. There you go. Adoring fans in the Zoom chat as well. We've had a OMG, you're sick from Emily. If that's not the endorsement you wanted, I don't know what is.
Well, that was brilliant.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Hang on, Lois and Phoebe, you're still here, aren't you?
Yeah.
Do you normally jump over to a breakout room for 5 minutes, or do you just leave it?
Oh, yeah, no, whenever, I guess we just sort of let people mill around if they want to mill around, or, leave, they've got places to go. I haven't worked out how to use breakout rooms yet, so maybe that's a skill I need to acquire. But,
exactly.
yeah.
For now, this can be us politely telling people that the event's going.
Nothing to see here.
That banjo was fantastic. I've now got a strange urge to procrastinate further from uni work by learning to play.
It's really fun, especially that sort of banjo, which is very...
Did you just say you just made that up?
Yeah, I mean, I not right that second.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, it's a sort of variation of something pretty basic.
I mean, it sounds great, so you don't need to reveal that.
That claw hammer banjos, once you learn to play it, you can play that when you're absolutely wasted. Whereas the sort of complicated stuff, I one drink and I can't do it at all.
You've been reminding me to pick up my violin playing again. I've neglected it so much over the last kind of couple of months, and I think that's going to come back.
Absolutely, drag out some bluegrass records and learn how to play a few old-timey double stops. You're away.
Yeah, music is keeping me sane here. We're doing online choir, which is brilliant. Obviously disastrous and never works, but it's really fun.
So is everybody live and they sing together at the same time?
We attempt to. It's not worked yet, but we're going to keep trying and see if we can manage it.
Isn't there like latency on the sort of?
Yeah.
Some people are sort of way out of time from other people.
Yeah, and lag does play into it. So people have to kind of second guess their lag. Sometimes we mute everybody and then we all sing, and so we can only hear ourselves and the piano accompaniment. But it is brilliant.
We all did it. We did one, and we just basically everybody played separately along to a recording that was on their phone in an earpiece, and so you don't know what's going to happen until you put them all together. Theoretically, you should all be in time, but God, it was a mess. The first version. It's much harder than you think.
Oh, I've been really impressed seeing all the videos of the kind of like big brass bands and stuff who've got kind of 30 or 40 people.
I know. I think they have some software that I'm not privy to.
Either that or they've got a lot of free time.
That's true.
Our choir director's doing the same thing, teaching himself all this software. I see Ashan's just told me off for bad mouthing our choir and not be able to keep in time. Sorry, Trinity College Chapel Choir.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I mean, thanks for inviting me along to this, by the way, Les and Phoebe. It's been really, really good fun. And the Zoom format works really well, actually.
Yeah, delighted to have you. It's been brilliant. You two have made all three of you actually made such a great trio to listen to.
Yeah, we had thought about using House Party, but after your very bad review of the House Party I got in your column, I thought it'd be a bad idea.
I thought it was miserable. It's so buggy and it just didn't work. I mean, this is much more stable.
This is much more stable, but I think there's something to be said for the novelty of house partying with a famous columnist. But there we go.
Next time,
yeah. If we get extended to the end of next month, maybe we can look at that.
Is it something Camilla Long would be impressed by?
Get all columnists on House Party all together.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I know. I don't think that would work for the Media Sock Speaks, actually.
Who else have you got?
Not quite the professional vibe you're going for.
Yeah, maybe. Who have we got coming up? So we've had Rita Chakrabarti, we had Lisa Armstrong, couple of photojournalists, which was really exciting. Coming up, biggest names, I think, got Roger Deakins, which is going to be fantastic. I think I'm ridiculously excited for that, but I have no idea where I'm even going to start with prep, because that man has done so much. It's unbelievable. And next week I've got Rebecca Vincent, who's the director of Reporters Without Borders.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, yeah.
Excellent.
It's good because usually, you know, people who are too busy or don't want to travel up to Oxford or don't want to waste an evening chatting with students are more than happy to chat for a podcast for an hour or whatever.
Virtually no way to say no to that.
Exactly, I know.
No one is too busy. You all have to say yes.
Although Alan has been too busy to reply to my emails, so
Oh no.
not that I'm bitter, but
Alan, George.
Send him a message request on Facebook.
I know he's our senior member, but goodness
Change
knows
your
where he's
Zoom
at.
background to Alan, and then
Yeah, that's how you have to summon him now that we're all working digitally.
you stand in front of a mirror, chant Alan Rusford 3 times, and he appears.
Right, well, I need to bounce off in
Yeah.
a minute because I'm on dinner duty, and Tim, I'm sure you probably need to go at some point as well.
I haven't said that much out loud in a week.
I haven't seen this many people in a week.
It's quite weird.
I know, I'm just like social contact. Did you say you need to drink or you need a drink?
I need a drink.
Oh, okay.
Me
I'm
too.
going to have a drink. It's a little bit early, but I don't care.
I know, I was thinking that at the start of the call, but I was like, I cannot justify that at 4:40.
No. No, bad luck as well, unless you keep it under the table.
Exactly. Post 6 o'clock now, so I think we're good to go.
Good. All right. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much, Tim.
Take care.
See you later.
Bye.
Oh, so good.
It was so good.
I know.
You were such a natural host. It was brilliant.
I'm glad it was good. Did you enjoy?
Yeah, so much. So
Good.
much.
I'm really glad.
I recorded it as well, so I can send you that.
I saw, oh my God, when you record, I saw record it